Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I wanted to make a video where I reviewed Just Kids by Patti Smith. Just Kids is Patti Smith's, the musician Patti Smith's memoir of her relationship with the artist Robert Mapplethorpe in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. And this book won the National Book Award, I think, back in 2010, maybe 2011, and it's been on my list of books I wanted to try to remember to read for a long time. And I got around to reading it as a part of my nonfiction November. So I read this not because I was particularly interested in the musical career of Patti Smith or even the artistic career of Robert Mapplethorpe. As a matter of fact, having grown up in a small town in East Texas in the 1970s, in 1980s, I was vaguely aware of Patti Smith, the musician, and some of her music. I was aware of, her performances on Saturday Night Live, which I saw, and I was aware of Robert Mapplethorpe and his controversial erotic photography. But that wasn't why I wanted to read the book so badly. I wanted to read the book so badly, and really was really interested in it because was interested in the art scene and the music scene in New York City in the 1960s and 70s. And that was my primary interest in reading it, just about that kind of creative atmosphere about New York City during that time period. And certainly Smith and Mapplethorpe were right in the middle of that. But to kind of give you some idea of how little I knew about them before I knew about the existence of this book, I didn't know that Smith and Mapplethorpe had even had a relationship. So in some ways, one of the enjoyments of the book is that I went into the book not knowing a whole lot about what I was going to read or about the people involved. Just Kids is a memoir, and I don't read a lot of memoirs, in part because as a genre, I'm not really a big fan. To accept a memoir as being true, you have to kind of accept that it's being emotionally true, and therefore you have to accept the emotional honesty of the author and their approach to the subject matter. Having said that, no memoir is completely honest. I don't know of anybody who can be strip themselves so bare as to be completely honest about their motivations, their actions, the impact that they had on others. I don't really think that's possible, but I do think it's possible for you to have faith that the author is doing their best to talk to you about the events in as clear and as an unbiased way as possible. But that is always a difficulty. It's also difficult, I think, in a memoir for the author to create the right voice. I think it's too easy for memoirists to fall into the kind of desperate to have the reader believe their version of events, the kind of desperate to make themselves appear perhaps more heroic or more giving or more kind or a better person than they actually were. They can fall into the trap of trying to make the people who they had negative experiences with seem worse or more horrible or more in the wrong. They can go the other way and be too self-deprecating and too ready to build others up and tear themselves down and almost trying to martyr themselves in the name of creating a true story in which they appear to be worse than they actually were. It's a really fine line. It's a really delicate balance, and I kind of shy away from memoirs in part because I'm not sure how effectively I think all memoirists can achieve that balance. So the other part about, I think, writing a good memoir is, do you have a good story to tell? Is it a good story? Is it merely entertaining? Is it funny? Is it poignant? And in the case of Patti Smith here and Just Kids, she has a very good story to tell. So if you don't know, Patti Smith is a musician whose most famous album is called Horses, and essentially in Horses and in her music she tried to blend poetry with rock and roll music, and the outcome of it is somewhat surprising. It's not that she's blending poetry in the sense of necessarily spoken words over music. She sings, and if you wanted to go and you've never seen her perform, you can look up her performances on Saturday Night Live are available on YouTube. You can hear her perform Gloria, and I guess her most famous song was Because the Night Belongs to Lovers. I think she did that on SNL, and you can find that on YouTube as well. Her style almost feels like a forerunner of punk music. Now, I'm not really a rock and roll historian. I don't know if that's true, but there's a certain punk edge to what she's doing, and she became quite successful and quite famous. Horses is considered to be one of the great rock and roll albums ever created, and she is, I believe, a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Robert Mapplethorpe was an artist who tried various mediums for his artwork. He eventually, in part, according to Smith, through her guidance, settled on photography as a way to really kind of capture what he was looking for, and became a really celebrated photographic artist in New York in the 1970s, and particularly in the 1980s. And his work was highly sought after, and he was a well-regarded artist. He also was gay, and he had for a long time repressed that, and he enters into a relationship with Patti Smith, a romantic relationship and a friendship relationship with Patti Smith when they were both young in the late 1960s, and later kind of comes to grips with the fact that he was in fact gay. What Just Kids is about their relationship with one another. It's a story of young lovers in New York City. It's a story of young people living for art and really committed to the artistic ideals. Both Mapplethorpe and particularly Smith were well versed in kind of the history of struggling artists and of artists who lived for art, and they were in lots of ways emulating that. You get a real sense of how close Smith and Mapplethorpe were, of their friendship, of their love for one another, which was difficult, ends up being difficult to define, that certainly went beyond the physical, but included the physical. Her struggles with Mapplethorpe's growing awareness that he is gay, and his embracing of his homosexuality and his exploration of it. And she's honest, I think, about what that did to her, how that made her feel, and also then, I think, then you believe that she came to accept it. She and he continued to live together, to occupy the same space, to have the same really close relationship with one another. They oftentimes looked askance at one another's lovers, not out of jealousy, but just because they didn't necessarily think people were right for them. And they also then, recognized oftentimes the kind of person they wanted the other to be with, and were able to be happy and accepting and inclusive of that. One of the things that comes through in reading the memoir is a difference between Smith and Mapplethorpe in terms of ambition. Smith portrays Mapplethorpe as being really driven, as being money conscious, of wanting that material success, of wanting to be recognized for the genius he believed he was. That she was more retiring, less interested in fame, less interested in the monetary aspects or rewards of an artistic career than he was. And then, one of the ironies that's presented is that, and as a matter of fact, she quotes Robert Mapplethorpe of saying, that to Patti, that she got famous first. And certainly she did probably achieve a greater level of fame and a lot more probably social acceptance because of who Mapplethorpe was. Unfortunately, he was really controversial outside of New York City, and his greatness as an artist probably wasn't acknowledged until long after his death, whereas Smith was recognized almost immediately for the innovator that she was, for the lyricist that she was, and for the impact that she had on the music scene. I don't feel like I still feel like that she's being emotionally honest in this, because she never doubts that Mapplethorpe was the greater artist, that he was the true genius, and she's not pretending to be an imposter, and she's not, putting herself down unnecessarily. She's just kind of approaching her, or talking about herself, as more of a workmanlike approach to art, and kind of dogged persistence in her art. whereas Mapplethorpe seemed to just have been imbued with the artistic genius from the beginning and to have known that he was a genius from the very beginning. So most of the memoir is the story of their relationship with one another, and then the story of how each becomes successful and how that affected their relationship, how their living together relationship came to an end, how they both went their own ways and found other love interests. And then near the end of the memoir, the tragic story of Mapplethorpe's death from complications involving HIV, and his painful death, and how painful that death was for Patti Smith, even though she had moved on and was happily married to Fred Sonic Smith and had 2 kids. Along the way, Just Kids doesn't disappoint, as if you read it as I did, because I was interested in the New York creative and artist scene. You're not let down by who Patti Smith and Mapplethorpe ran into. They lived at kind of the you could almost think of as an artist colony at the Chelsea Hotel in New York City. Smith meets Jimi Hendrix. She meets Todd Rundgren. She gets to hang out with the band called The Band. She eventually gets to perform for Bob Dylan. She collaborates with Bruce Springsteen. And she gets enmeshed in that New York City musical world. I believe she opened for the New York Dolls for a while. And so she's really kind of a part of the music scene. She was also a part of the poetic scene. She meets, beat poets Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, Peter Orlovsky. She met and was friends with for a while the beatnik writer William Burroughs. She had a relationship with the playwright and actor Sam Shepard, which went on for a while, which Mapplethorpe did not necessarily approve of Sam Shepard, in part because he was married and had kids with another woman. They hung out at places where members of Andy Warhol's factory hung out. Smith plays CBGBs. She records at Jimi Hendrix recording studio. It is a memoir that's full of that kind of spirit, I think, of the creative scene of New York. And so the question then is, given what I said about memoirs, does Smith succeed? Is this a successful memoir? There are a couple of things that I think are worth noting. Early on, Smith's style feels a little bit overly arty, but it grows on you, and as her story becomes more and more unique, and you get more into the meat of the story, some of the artiness seems to go away, or it seems more appropriate for the topics that she's discussing. There is some lightly veiled mysticism that works its way in here, and you begin to realize that dates and numbers and things like that are very important to Patti Smith, and I'm not trying to run down anybody's belief system, but it can read as a little goofy. If you're not interested in the New York City art scene, then I'm not sure this would necessarily be a book for you, but she does make it very, very interesting. And I think as a whole, Just Kids is a very good book, and I believe Patti Smith walks those lines, those kind of difficult, narrow path that a good memoirist has to walk. I think she is honest as a memoirist can be. I think she balances her desire to tell her story her way and her view of Robert Mapplethorpe and their relationship. I think she balances that well. She's not overly critical. She's not overly hurt. She's not overly deferential. She's not overly self-deprecating. She seems to kind of find that balance, and at the end, she creates so effectively, I think, the story of their relationship and their friendship that even though you know that Mapplethorpe is going to die, her discussions of his death are quite powerful and emotional. So I was really happy that I finally got around to reading Just Kids by Patti Smith. If you've read it, or if you have some comments about my video, please let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.